I am very excited to introduce our presenter this evening. So, John Harmon is widely commissioned composer. He created the Jazz Studies program at Lawrence University and later founded and led the award-winning Jazz Nonette Matrix, which toured the country for nearly 6 years. In 1974, 9 musicians came together in Appleton to form Matrix, a jazz fusion ensemble led by composer and keyboardist John Harmon. The group rose to prominence on the national circuit while recording 6 acclaimed albums. Harmon serves as composer in residence for the Red Lodge Music Festival, artistic director for the Fox Jazz Fest, and in 2005 was named a fellow of the Wisconsin Academy of Science, Arts, and Letters. He holds honorary doctorates from both Lawrence University and Ripon College. John, we welcome you and thanks for coming.
I was trying to figure out who she was talking about. Well, I'm humbled and honored to be here as a part of your monthly presentations. And I'm especially proud to talk about this book, but in particular the band that inspired it. I'm asked, how do you write a book? And I'm a little more at home with notes than I am with the written word, but I love literature, and I had to be convinced to do this story, which is unique, and for a historical society to honor that story. And it's a beautiful story, to tell you the truth. It almost reads like a Hollywood script, because if there was anything less likely to happen than take 9 unheralded people from the Midwest and do what? Not pop music, jazz music with a new twist. I mean, first of all, 9 people, it costs some money to hire a band like that. Secondly, to sustain it, and to then actually achieve some success with it. It's a long story, and it reads rather easily, and I'll have a few things I might read from it. We did manage to claw our way to prominence in the 70s, and it was a difficult time because pop music, as opposed to jazz-related musics, it's night and day difference. Our vision, I don't want to boast and say my vision, because the other 8 members of the band and our sound guy jumped in with the vision and supported it wholeheartedly. That vision was to create a new quality jazz-related music using a concept that was developed in the 19th century, which was programmatic music. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, it meant that when the 19th century Romantic composers started doing all their stuff, Tchaikovsky and Richard Strauss and so forth and so on, they painted pictures with their music. And so they would print in the programs themselves, they'd print what was intended. So they would tell stories like Swan Lake or, Till Eulenspiegel, and sometimes very dramatic stories. Well, in essence, that's how I compose music, from imagery, from a book I've read, from a character I've been enchanted by a native culture in particular. That's how I compose music. I use imagery, and I go to the piano, I write at the piano, and I probe around. I do improvise a lot, so I probe around till something resonates that seems to fit the image that I'm trying to represent. So, program music, jazz music, 9 guys, unknown people. It's pretty remarkable and impossible. by all standards, by all, however you want to grade it. However, when you have 9 individuals, and also our sound guy and our roadies who believed so deeply in this that they went through hell to get to a point where we were finally making what we should have been making, which was some recognition for what we were doing. How did we even do it? In some ways I'm still baffled. In order to sustain, we had to do what was called cover music at the beginning stages. Cover meaning popular stuff. We did do some Marvin Gaye, for example. We did some Blood, Sweat, and Tears. We did some Chicago, and we actually did Captain and Tennille, and not real proud of all that. We did Tower of Power to sustain while underneath Fred Sturm, who was an original member of the band, who you all know who that is. We created the real book, the one that the vision was going to embrace. Forward-looking, new music, sometimes using classical techniques. I have a master's degree in composition, not from Lawrence, but from the University of New York in Buffalo. And I was a composition major at Lawrence, and as Gwen had outlined, I was the first originator of the jazz studies program that was actually the year before started by Fred Sturm, by the way, who got a petition, took it to the president of the university to give credit for a student-run band for 1 year with the stipulation that they hire a professional the year after. I was that guy. I was paid dirt wages. Didn't matter. I was having a lot of fun and doing stuff I'd never conceived before. So, how does a book like this come to pass? How does Matrix come to pass? Well, as I said, we started with I was a jazz musician coming home from New York. I'm born in Wisconsin, so I'm a Wisconsin native, and I jumped at the chance to come back to Lawrence and work there. But after a couple of years and some very successful stuff with the band, with the university, I mean, it was brought to my attention by the people who pull the purse strings over at Lawrence. They would never have a full-time jazz instructor. And I'm thinking to myself, let's see, does 85 to 90 hours a week, is that considered full-time? I did the band, I directed the jazz band, which became the Luge, which you all know now, which is quite well known. I also taught jazz history. I had 185 students at times. I did jazz arranging, composition and arranging, and I did African music. And then I had up to 33 private students. Now, if that ain't full-time, I don't know what is. So the only person I ever knew that came close to my workload was Prof. Schrader, who was this beloved, magnificent educator, teacher, human being, musician. He's maybe one of the most loved guys ever that I ever knew. And I actually took classes under him when I was an undergraduate at Lawrence. But when it comes to writing a book, I was against the idea because I'm not an author, but I had stories to tell. I'm trying to find it. Oh, here we go. And I shared some of these stories with one of our dear family friends, and of course, I had this so well organized that I can't find anything. Here we are. So we had a dear friend who was an incredible jazz advocate. She and her husband came to everything I ever did, it seems, and then we would go to dinner almost weekly and hang out. We were just pals. And I'm going to read this little foreword to the book because it probably tells how this all worked. It's better than I can. Mindy Sabrario. John Harmon. This may be hard for me. Knew the musical statement he wanted to make to the world. To do this, he needed opportunity, he needed determination, and he needed musicians who shared his philosophy with the expertise to execute his vision. In short, he needed a miracle. In 1974, these elements came together, and the musical experiment called Matrix found its voice. And what a voice it was. Matrix spoke with a voice filled with joy, energy, and originality that captivated music lovers and critics alike. A voice like theirs had never been heard. It was a shared philosophy expressed in notes. Their music was a true collaboration, each man committing to the adventure, each man contributing to the whole. As the music evolved, it continued to build and expand. There was no perceived destination, no assurance that it would be understood, and no guarantee that it would be appreciated. No matter, they were committed to integrity, excellence, and respect for their audience. Musically, they extended their hand, trusting the audience to reach out and grasp the beauty and honesty of their music. It's clear, that when you see these men together today, they share a bond far stronger than friendship. They share the same values. They share the same pride. They share a loyalty that can only be achieved through having tested themselves. Together they shared and achieved the same vision. They created the legacy of Matrix, one of excellence, invention, and collaboration. Over the years, stories of Matrix have been shared and appreciated by loyal fans. Family and friends have repeatedly urged John to share these memories in a book. He always declined. He simply wasn't ready. But one summer night, John and Traff, my husband Dan, and I were sitting at a table, sipping a drink and enjoying our dinner. The conversation turned to a memory of Matrix that even Traff hadn't heard. When John had finished his recollection, we were all silent for a moment. Finally, we all begged, please consider writing a book. The story is so unique and incredibly moving. But you need to tell it. It needs to be told in your own voice. A pause, a smile. To our shock and amazement, he said, you're right, I'll do it. So here it is. All it took was 45 years, 4 friends around a table, and 4 perfect gimlets. I get a little emotional reading that because Mindy has passed, but she was an amazing lady, probably one of the funniest ladies I've ever known. So anyway, I wanted to share that with you because that's really did how it come to pass. I would share stories of road stories in particular, which are many and varied, and some are funny, some are very scary. Some are extremely disappointing, and some are exultant and triumphal. So it's all here in this little book on this remarkable entity that happened in your backyard. And it is historically important. And now I'm thrilled that I actually, with my wife's help, got through the process. And it was mostly during COVID when we couldn't work, couldn't go out, couldn't do anything. So I finished Symphony Number 7 and this book. So, well, yeah, I had this big fat legal pad by hand, wrote the whole thing out, and then my wife would type it up and edit. She's very, very good at that sort of thing. So anyway, just to move on to the little sketchy part of the story, and I'll read a couple of things somewhere along the line here, but what was important was the integrity and honesty with which these guys, I mean, life on the road is not easy. It seems glamorous. Oh, you get in a car, you go and play, and then you go and do it some more the next day. Yeah, that's part of it. The real joy was sharing the music and watching the response. And then people lining up to buy the albums and sign and shake our hands and so forth. And to this day, this is literally 50 years later, half a century, I'm still getting calls as of last month. How do I get a copy of Brown Boy? Or can you share, find me a way to get the pony piece or the this, that, or the other. And, it's kind of weird. Can the band come and play at our festival? I actually have had that happen on a number of occasions. But what's more interesting, I guess, is the fact that the interest, especially among educators, kids these days never heard of the band. But band directors, when they share some of the music, their jaws drop. Because this band was capable of extremely virtuosic playing, clean ensemble playing. And everybody contributed to the overall. I mean, I might bring a piece in. Fred and I were the prime composers at the beginning. And so we'd bring in the notes. But then everybody, they were all such great musicians. What do you think we should do here at letter A? Don't you think if we could get a little more life into this, how about staccato over here in this part of letter C, and that kind of input. And it was always intelligent input, never derogatory or anything like that. But I think it'd be cooler to do this. What do you think? And they'd always put it to me if it was my piece, and I'm there, let's do it. We'd try it, and then it was truly a collective. And one of the things that was joyful about the road was a new venue every night, totally new, and walking on stage literally knowing you're going to walk out there with hundreds of new fans. They just would love our stuff. And some of it was very uniquely different. Some of it was not popular. Some of it wasn't easy. It was complex, sometimes very dissonant. And frankly, it was difficult music, difficult to play in particular. But our rehearsal schedules were such. We went on the road. We never had music stands. Everything was memorized. So to get complex music memorized, and some of it was very virtuosic. The trumpet players always come to me and say, yeah, that might be easy to play on the piano. Try it on this thing. So I got more than my share of chiding. But to take the book of music that we had and memorize it for touring. We just didn't have music on stage. That wasn't the game. that's part of why we were also quite good, because I'm musically so so appreciated by musicians, and later also critics caught on. So you might say, well, why aren't you still playing? There was a time when, but one year we were out on the road for 310 days. That's a lot of traveling. That's a lot of playing. That's a lot of, and we were starting to have families, me included. And we reached the end of a tour and had a little meeting. And I could see, not only on my own, if I looked in the mirror, I could see a little burnout happening here, because we had just really burned it pretty hard. And let's take a month or so off, kind of regroup. I said, fine, give me a chance to write some new stuff. It'll be, yeah, great. Didn't work out that way. A month turned into 2, into 3. Somebody got a child, maybe me or my wife. And it just got more difficult to leave the comfort of home and stuff. But while we were there, we made a profound impact. And I know so because musicians, there was a guy in the Stan Kenton band. You all know who Stan Kenton is, right? He said to me, we all envy you. You're doing all your own music. You turn the book over every month or two. You're touring, you're recording. This is everything we wanted to do. We're playing the same book night after night after night after night after night. You all have a chance to express yourself. Everybody gets to solo. It's not like that in the Kenton band. And it's not like that in any larger ensemble. So, I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but that's okay. Because I love talking about the experiences I've had being a part of. I'm humbled to be a part of a musical group that was so damn good. Literally. And you don't have to take my word for it. Later, I'll read you a couple of the most profoundly biggest critics in America and what they had to say about us. But let's see. We had 9 different guys, a sound man who was absolutely as important as any member of the band, because he knew the nuances of our musicality and how to properly mix it for an audience. We had 32 channels of Bose speakers. So everybody was mic'd to the max. 6 on the drums alone. But that was not for loudness. That was for the subtlety that we were capable of. Because, we could peel the paint off a back wall if we needed to, and often we did. But we could also whisper and sigh and weep even. It was an amazing musical organization. I don't call it a band. It was a collective of such sensitivity that I'm just proud to have been a member of it all. And I could talk forever about the joys of music making with an ensemble like this. And I will leave some time for questions if you have any, but let's see. What should I read to you? What can I share with you that would be of interest? Yes. Certainly. Of course. The original members of Matrix were as follows. Lead trumpet was Mike Hale. We called him Tex. He wasn't from Texas. He's actually born in Oklahoma, but he lived in Texas for a while as a kid. And he did the heavy lifting when it came to high stratospheric playing. Mike Hale. Second was our little Italian genius, Jeff Petrangelo, who was a child prodigy, worked in the youth orchestra in Milwaukee. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant player, but also buffoonish. Calamity, sort of, what would be the right word? Malapropes or something. He was given to that. Not his fault. He was a brilliant guy and played as good as anybody in the country. But he just fell into things that would fall on his shoulders comedically. He was a short little guy, a little overweight, and he would have this habit of pointing to his midriff, and he'd speak to his fat cells. He said, "Be quiet, I told you I'd get to you later. I promise you I'll get," he was hysterical and also brilliant. Third trumpet was maybe the most natural musician I've ever known. His name was Larry Darling. He played third trumpet, he played synthesizer. We used vocals not as lead vocals like in pop music, but as color. And we had 3 or 4 guys that could really sing beautifully. So I would use very often voices for color in background situations. So that's the trumpet section. Then we had two trombones, a tenor trombone played by Kurt Dietrich, and our original bass trombone player was Fred Sturm, who also composed a lot of our early music. And in between, we had a saxophonist. Between the upper brass and the lower brass, the homogenizer in between was, the original member was Michael Bard. He played soprano saxophone, tenor saxophone, alto saxophone, and flute. So that is the horns. That's 6 different horns. And then we had 3 rhythm players. No guitar. What? No guitar? Well, that's the way it was. We had me on the keyboards. We had Randall Ferd played bass. He was from Appleton. He was not a Lawrence guy, but and then of course our original drummer was Tony Wagner. Everybody was a member of the Lawrence team, with the exception of Randall Ferd, who was pretty well known in a group quite well known here in Appleton in those days called Taylor. I don't know if you know that. That makes any sense, but Randall was a brilliant, beautiful, very intellectual, quiet kind of a guy, handsome, and he sang beautifully. So when we were doing cover stuff, all the girls went pitter-pat. And but he was a wonderful, wonderful musician. So those are the original members of the group. And later, Michael Bard was replaced by amazing musician John Kirchberger, who then he was probably one of the great solo voices that we had in the group. Everybody was, but Kirchberger was Kirch, as we called him. And then Mike Murphy took over the drum chair early on also, and it was amazing. He had this funny thing where, they have what they call a kick drum in the drum set, which is the bass drum, and you use it with your right foot. Well, he had what he called the magic shoe. It had a heel on it that put his foot at just the right angle so he could really pop it with great. So his magic shoe was a big part of his performance, which was amazing to begin with. So that's the band. That was the original group. So, how did we get even started to make our way? Once we jettisoned the cover book and just did our own music, we didn't work for a while. But we had signed a very bad contract with a management team down in Chicago that had a recording studio. And they made all kinds of promises, and it sounded great to me because we needed to record. That's how you get your stuff out there and people recognize you and so forth. And they were very big on talk and very little on delivering. So they were going to, make us famous, all kinds of stuff that was wrong. And so we foolishly signed a contract without an attorney. Bad idea. Bad idea. And after several months with this outfit, we realized we weren't getting anywhere. All these promises were just empty. But we did make some demos of recordings, because they did have a recording studio. So how did it happen? Well, let me do the brief version. Here we were floundering around in Chicago, playing silly, dumb gigs, not anything close to what our vision had in mind. And somehow one of the demos that we had made was played on a local jazz station. And turns out that the name probably doesn't mean much to you. There were three major booking agencies in America. There was William Morris, ABC, and Willard Alexander. And Willard had an office in Chicago. So one of his agents had a little tryst planned for the afternoon with a young lady. And of course, he tuned into the local jazz station. And I will read just a bit. This is how it happened, literally. Right time, right place, serendipity, etc. Once in a while, despite the unlikelihood, timing and destiny occasionally collide. By some cosmic stroke of chance, something happened that triggered a shift in our fortune, a veering off from the floundering direction of our career. Somehow, almost unbelievably, one high-powered tune from the demo we'd made was played on a local Chicago jazz show. On his way to a tryst with a young lady, Dennis Justice, that's a name that's very important to us, one of the Chicago office agents of the Willard Alexander Agency, was tuned to that station. He heard Matrix playing one of our high-powered pieces, maybe Fred's Earth and the Overlords, and in his words, totally flipped. He pulled off to the side of the road, called the lady he had planned to meet, and said, "My dear, change of plans." After he learned the name of the band, he turned his car around and headed directly back to the office and phoned Willard himself, who lived in New York, by the way, with a rave review. After some inquiries, he found out that we would be playing at a place called Poor Richard's in Skokie. He picked up his lady friend and went to hear us live. In his own words, "You guys were even more exciting in person," and so forth and so on. So that was the trick. He believed so completely from just hearing one tune, and then of course he heard us live and play a full evening of stuff. And he talked Willard himself, who was a mogul in the industry, one of the real titans. Willard flew out, heard us, loved us. We loved him. Things changed after that. Actually, it's a long story, and I don't want to bore you with it, but it's fascinating. It's in the book here, but the former company that we were with, that we had signed, we took this contract to an independent attorney, and he looked at it, he read through, and he kept shaking his head. He said, "My God, you guys are in bondage. They can go over after your families." I said, "Well, what do we do?" He said, the best thing right now, there's no court of law that would ever support this kind of lopsided agreement. So he said, just breach, walk. We did. We walked, and we had a huge gig in downtown Chicago at the McCormick Center. It was for the NAMM, the National Association of Music Merchants. Big gig that everybody will die for, because you get in front of all these people, and all of them with money and all of them with... So, huge gig. And as we're walking onto the stage, we're each handed a subpoena. I'd never seen so many zeros. Each of us, $1 million subpoena. Obviously, we were not in any real emotional state to play this important gig. I mean, we made it through, I'm sure, but everybody had, Anyway, we got through that. Willard himself took over the band, and we settled out of court. But we owed money, a lot of money. So we're in a hole. But that's not the issue here. I wanted to show you how we catapulted into national prominence, like I said before, like a Hollywood script. Dennis Justice, the agent who was so enthralled with us, he booked a tour, a real tour. And he was a persuasive enough guy, big 6'3", big bush, full head of hair, big beard, lovable kind of looking, menacing looking if you didn't know him, but he was a very lovable guy and very knowledgeable. So anyway, he booked this tour, and we never had a gigs like this. We went to colleges, and the tour worked its way to the West Coast. And the crown jewel of our tour was the Monterey Jazz Festival. It's big stuff. And by then we had our book together, and we had our players together. We knew what we were doing. Still, it's a little bit intimidating. So I just want to there's a little bit in the book that I would just like to read a very short version of, because it's so important to our future. So, imagine this. There's an empty auditorium. They don't let the doors, they don't open them until 15 minutes before the show. So in the meantime, we have to do a sound check. We had no idea. The Monterey Festival is huge in terms of seating and all that. So they're lining up outside, and we don't even have a clue. So sound check obviously is very important. So I'll start there. I'll never forget the sound check before the gates even opened to the public. We were scheduled to open the Sunday night concert. During our warm-up on stage, we played maybe 16 bars of Catalpa Complex, which was one of our tunes, before the crowd queued up outside started hooting and hollering. It was as though they were primed and ready for something new, fresh, and exciting. Well, I'm pretty damn sure we answered that. I should tell you that over 7,000 people spilled into that place. It was amazing. Naturally, we played a set from our good book. Although we all believed in what we were doing, the music itself had never been validated by a huge, knowledgeable audience of the size and sophistication. Attendance, by the way, was close to 7,000. Any doubts about audience response were soon dispelled. They seemed to love everything we threw at them, and we were playing great. I remember feeling a surge of, I guess it was pride, as I stepped to the mic to announce whatever the next piece was. By God, we were being validated in spades. The audience was hearing sounds that they'd never been exposed to and were loving it. As I relate, listen to this. As I relate this, I'm welling up with emotion. Hello. We were actually doing it. The dream, the vision, it was happening. But the kicker was our closing piece, Fred's Childhood's End, inspired by the Arthur C. Clarke book. So there again, the program business. It was a scaled-down version of the piece that we had premiered with the Milwaukee Symphony earlier. Fred had scored a synthesized ascending crescendo to accompany the dramatic finish as it was coming to its, kick-ass conclusion. As if orchestrated by God himself, a huge jet roared over the facility in perfect sync with the synthesizer, and with the last rapid, virtuosic, precisely executed passage and stinger, the crowd went bonkers, leaping to their feet in thunderous approval. Honest to God, I never experienced anything like it. We were all kind of stunned, never having gone through anything this powerful. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I did know one thing. Matrix, this bunch of idealistic dreamers, was something special. Thank you. Later in the tour, we went to a place on the West Coast called Concerts by the Sea, a very beautiful jazz venue. And here's what happens when you make that kind of impact. We're bringing our stuff into the performance venue of Concerts by the Sea, and you had to go down some stairs. And on the walls were in 5-inch letters the review written by the great Leonard Feather and the impact that it had on him, which I'll read later. But I'm thinking, so this is what it's like to be in the rarefied air of this kind of appreciation. And it was an amazing thing to see the review, floor to ceiling, 5-inch letters. That's Leonard Feather, that's the review. And we're all going, holy man, we're just bumpkins from the Midwest. But here we were, playing Concerts by the Sea. Anyway, that's the kind of thing that, well, here's another part of it. That as soon as we had finished that set at the festival, there were 4 remote radio stations covering the festival. They were shoving microphones into our faces. Who are you guys? Where did you come from? Do you record? We hadn't even recorded yet. And, why haven't we heard of you? And where are you going to be next? And blah, 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 on and it was all kind of like stunning. I mean, we'd never had this kind of response to our stuff. So, and with Leonard Feather, now Leonard Feather was the Los Angeles Times and Downbeat Magazine's one of the principal critics. New York Times was the most important critic, was John Wilson for the New York Times. So I will refer to that in a bit. So everything sort of soared after that, and so booking us was no problem after that. Dennis did this insane job of getting that first tour and talking Jimmy Lyons, the head of the Monterey Festival, into taking us. Sight unheard. We didn't have a recording. He trusted Dennis's word, and that's how it worked. And from that time on, in Willard, Alexander's stable, he had Stan Kenton, Woody Herman, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Thad Jones, Mel Lewis, Buddy Rich, and Matrix. So the good part of that was we often would open for one of those bands. We had a whole week. Well, we had a whole week, but on the first night, the Duke Ellington Orchestra was finishing, so they played first. So I always had this Duke Ellington open for us. Not true, but it made a good story. Anyway, we got to play with some of the great players ever. And because we were in Willard's stable, we often crossed paths, or sometimes, staying in the same hotels and stuff. And you'd, do a little talk shop and trading addresses and all that stuff. They were also envious of us. Guess what? We don't play the same book every night. And when we tire of something, we just jettison it and make some new stuff. And, well, it was a great adventure, probably the most important musical, and from a humanitarian point of view, one of the most important chapters in my life, without doubt. Not only did I have the unparalleled support of my dear bride, who was raising children, by the way, while I was out pounding the roads. But we were very happy, and we made a bunch of records here. We made one with RCA Victor, 2 with Warner Brothers. You've probably heard of these companies. Pablo Today, the great Norman Granz label. Norman Granz was the father of Jazz at the Phil and the manager of Oscar Peterson, Ella Fitzgerald, Joe Pass, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we got to mix it up with all these people. And it was pretty heady stuff. And also, they loved us. I mean, the big boys loved us too. So, with one exception, we did a little mini tour with opening for Buddy Rich. We had other names for him. Especially after he called Dennis and said, I can't repeat what he said, literally, but don't you ever put me in front of these guys. They're ripping off all of my, they were more, they were more popular than, by the time we played, people were leaving. So he was not a fan of Matrix, but he'd be the only one I can remember. So, anyway, I would like to, in a few minutes, if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer what I can, but okay. I mentioned John Wilson from the New York Times, and I mentioned Leonard Feather from Downbeat Magazine, and of course the Los Angeles Times. A little preamble. In the musical world we were navigating, journalistic criticism was part of the game. Almost totally from the reviewer's perspective, a career could be boosted or cruelly cut off at the knees. You only need to read a couple reviews from Nicholas Slonimsky's Lexicon of Musical Invective to realize how short-sighted, self-centered, and downright wrong critics can be. I'll just do a little side trip. He found reviews of Tchaikovsky, Bartók, Beethoven, and there was some scathing put-downs of these brilliant masterpieces. Copland, and Stravinsky was just vilified. All these masterpieces, which we now fully realize, they were critics put them down. So that's why I'm just taking a little aside here. However, In the hands of an effective critic, even a negative review often contains constructive criticism. An occupation that wields such power in determining an artist's career demands an effective knowledge and the fullest integrity of the reviewer. John Wilson, New York Times. The band's repertoire, made up of entirely original material, most of it by yours truly, its keyboard player, is a mixture of brassy sonority, occasional pomposity of Stan Kenton, and the kind of airy impressionism that Gil Evans created in the 1950s when he was providing settings for Miles Davis. On the recording, the two contrasting styles and sounds are brought into balance that is so effective that the final result is a distinctive style that can be identified as Matrix's own. He continued, there are brass ensembles for 3 trumpets and 2 trombones that are beautifully shaded and full of rich colors. Mr. Harmon's arrangement, made interesting use of voices to expand some instrumental passages. This is the New York Times. This is not the Green Bay Press Gazette. In an article called The Sound of Surprise from Matrix, Leonard Feather of the Los Angeles Times wrote, it would be a disservice to use the term jazz rock in analyzing this fascinating orchestra. Its scope is too broad, its level of artistry too high, its potential too great for pigeonholing. Most of the material is written by Harmon, who plays keyboards, and by trombonist Fred Sturm. Between them, they cover an amazing range of textures, colors, tempos, and moods, changing so often that the sound of surprise is never more than seconds away. A tremendous creative effort clearly went into the building of a library for Matrix. The result is a band that cannot fail to appeal to the emotions, the intellect, or any jazz enthusiasts who, tired of bebop cliches or rock overkill, is receptive to something adventurous, exciting, and just about totally new. I'll continue just to finish that chapter. I'd spoken earlier about our goals, and it appears we achieved them. When 2 tough critics of both knowledge and integrity, sincerely sing your praises, can you blame us for feeling pretty good about our work? I believe those reviews pretty much validate our musical worth. For the record, I'm damn proud of all of us. You're most gracious. I'm going to conclude any reading, and then I'll open it if you'd like to any questions. Or I do have books here. That sounds so like a shabby commercial. But I've been told it's a good read, so we'll see. Something I read perhaps 45 to 50 years ago became a personal mantra for me. The reference is from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince. The character of the fox gives the little prince a spoken gift. Quote, it is only with the heart that one can see clearly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. When I reflect on the Matrix journey, I can unequivocally declare, from the heart, I dearly loved the creative life we were living, beating the odds, chasing an ideal. Above all, I will always love that brotherhood of gifted, dedicated men who so willingly shared in the chase. For this memorable chapter of my life, I will always be deeply grateful. That concludes the book.